Good evening. I am Norm Ngukwi and welcome to African Drums this evening. This evening we have a special guest who is on a special visit to Guyana, and we would like to share his experiences, his knowledge, his thoughts with us in this program tonight. His name is Gabriel Christian, and he is from Dominica originally, and he will walk us through a little bit of his life's story, and then from there some of the very interesting and unique things that he brings to Guyana, and we're looking into the future for his participation in Guyana. Welcome, Gabriel.
Thank you, Norman. I want to say how happy I am to be here in Guyana on Channel 9 television, and I want to say that our Guyanese brothers and sisters of all stripes have been gracious, kind, and I've been able to see them at work and at play and engage in serious and profound reflection in the best way. And I wish all the best. I can tell you it's been a great couple of days. Yeah. So we want to thank the International Decade for the people of African descent, Guyana, led by Olive Sampson, my dear friend of many years, and people like Keith Blackman, Vincent Alexander, and the others, Sandra Ferrara, because that UN mandate to address issues of those of us whose descendants were scattered from Africa across the Americas and further afield needs addressing, and we're happy to come and to partner and to meet all sectors to find ways in which we can collaborate and get things done.
Let's take it a bit at a time.
Yeah.
First, talk a little bit about Gabriel Christian, so that we'll get the context for who is Gabriel Christian, and why does he have such a passion?
Yes.
A passion for what he's doing, and everybody senses the passion that you have, and you convey that, you transmit that. It's by osmosis.
Yes,
You link with your audience, you link with whatever group you're participating with. You almost link with the mic. So,
let me give it
share with us first. Who is?
I was born in Dominica,
which
is a CARICOM member nation in the early 1960s, and my father had served in the British Army, and as a matter of fact, today we're at the Legion, and I got a pin at the Legion.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
My mother was community leader in St. Joseph, Dominica. She was a Women's Institute leader, Forage Club leader during the war when the German U-boats were torpedoing ships and they couldn't get produce in. And she was a teacher as well. And there were 7 of us, 4 boys and 3 girls. And the boys, of course, got into the profession, so our parents were very strict. They were disciplinarians. Our oldest brother got a scholarship from Indira Gandhi's government to study in India in 1975 and became our first local veterinary doctor. In fact, the gentleman who is the CARICOM Secretary General now was his classmate back in Dominica, Owen LaRocque. My other brother studied civil engineering in England, and I went to Washington in '82 because the brother right before me was at Howard Medical School and became a general surgeon and a U.S. Army major combat surgeon. My sisters studied, respectively, Esther, she studied accounting. The first brother who went to India was Wellsworth, the other one was Lawson, who went to engineering school in England. Samuel went to school in Washington at Howard University. Esther went to University of DC, did accounting, and John Hopkins, where she did behavioral science. My last sister went to University of DC and American University, where she did environmental sciences. And my oldest sister was developmentally disabled. I went to University of DC, graduated in business, and then went to Georgetown University, where I did my Juris Doctor degree, and I'm a practicing trial lawyer in Maryland and federal courts. I'm married to a Dominican, Joan Christian, and I have 2 kids, Samora Dominique, named after my country of birth, and Makonnen, Christian.
Christian.
Yeah, they're both, well, Samora just got out of college. McConan is in college in biology. So that's Gabriel Christian in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, okay.
Yes. My origins, at least.
Okay.
Yes.
Now let's talk a little bit then about some of the unique experiences during that walk from your birth to now.
Yeah.
Because you have had some tremendous exposure to things that are not normal to Guyanese or to people in the Caribbean. There are things that have combined, that have not combined but came together during your lifetime that have made you a unique combination that I think contributes to the soup that makes you who you are, that gives you the spice that you have.
Yes.
And I think particularly for Guyanese, and also for West Indian development.
Yeah.
So share with us one or two of those components, those sectors of your experience that have brought you to this point.
Let me just say, what you're saying is very important, because oftentimes we get caught up on our differences, not knowing, not really appreciating fully that those of us in the Caribbean bound inextricably in this one tight cord of destiny, made up of different strands of ethnicity from Africa, India, Europe, and other places, Middle East even. We are strong in our appreciation of our heritage. But I was born at the time of independence movement, of Pan-African consciousness, when Guyana was experimenting, or at least going through the process of self-reliant, cooperative socialism under Forbes Burnham, and trying to find its way in the world. And so when I started high school in '72, we were very much taken with West Indian literature. We're moving from a strict focus on Shakespeare into books by Jan Carew of Guyana, Edgar Mittel Holzer, Children of Guyana, Jan Carew, Black Midas. So before I got here on Thursday night, I knew about Mahaika, I knew about Batika, I knew about the Rupununi and the Essequibo, I knew about the pork knockers in the hinterland mining gold. So all of that was part of my early formation. But in 1978, I boarded a boat. At that time, I was doing what they call senior Cambridge, it's GCE A levels. I was the president as the head boy at the college, which would be our sixth form college, and I was president of the Federation of Students, quite closely allied with Roosevelt Douglas. Roosevelt Douglas was the premier or the preeminent Caribbean Pan-Africanist and social justice advocate of his time. He had been to McGill in Canada and had been involved in the Sir George William University uprising involving one famous Guyanese leader's son. I think Chetty Jagan's son, Joey Jagan, was one of Roos's contemporaries and was involved in that matter. Another West Indian from Guyana was involved prior at a conference, Walter Rodney, who wrote the famous book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So in 1978, there is a festival in Cuba, the biggest in the history of the Cuban nation. It's the 11th World Festival of Youth and Students. And I am leading the student section of that delegation. The overall leader of that delegation was a gentleman who later became Prime Minister of Dominica, Pierre Charles. Fortunately, he's passed on. And on that boat are some very interesting people.
Literally on that boat.
One of them, of course, is Vincent Alexander, who is Guyanese. Another one who I met earlier and who we had as a guest in Washington was former President Ramota. President Ramota, I met him, and of course we both found out that we were at that same festival because we were from Guyana, Jamaica, all the islands, all over the world really. And we were talking about how we could secure the path of economic development that was more equitable than that which we enjoyed. So from very early on, I was involved in the Caribbean struggle for national liberation to define a path for ourselves where we had more control of our affairs and we could run our economies in ways that were certainly much more equitable and with results that would benefit not a tiny sliver of the society, but the vast majority of the people in each of our societies, based on anti-discrimination, anti-class prejudice, social justice, socialism, we said in those days. But it was the time of the Cold War, Arnold, and in the Cold War, things were such that if you had ideas that were not part of the prevailing wisdom, you would be ostracized. And so I got the scholarship for law to go to UWI, that's University of West Indies, in 1981 and 82. And the then Prime Minister, Eugenia Charles, who came into office in the 1980 election, stopped that. And so I went to Washington. I went to business school. And in Washington, in 1983, when the Grenada Revolution collapsed and the United States intervened, Eugenia Charles came and met me in Washington as the secretary, later the president of the Dominica Association of Washington, D.C. Right? But in Washington, I need you to know, we at that time had a strong cohort of Caribbean students. And in every U.S. university, this is how it works. First, you'll have Jamaicans, because Jamaica is by far the most populous English-speaking Caribbean island. And secondly, you'll have Trinidad, the second most populous English-speaking territory. And third, you'll have Guyana. And then you'll have what you call the small islanders, folks like me, you know. I became president, and the only reason I became president later on, because I swear I could tell a Jamaican more about Jamaica than he knew. Same for Trinidadians, certainly the same for Guyanese. Because we'd done O-levels, we'd done the geography, but we'd read the books, and I had a passion for Caribbean unity, and that's what really shaped, to this day, shaped my outlook on things Caribbean. So whenever there's a disaster in Dominica or Jamaica or Grenada or what have you, we find ourselves through different Caribbean organizations, like the Institute of Caribbean Studies, for instance, involved in helping out our community.
Now, you mentioned a couple names at that conference. Who are some of the others that were involved? You talked about Trinidad, Guyana, Barbados, Grenada.
Yes, so we had people from all over. There's a gentleman called Michael Purt. I think he became the Assembly Speaker of the House of Assembly in Jamaica. We had people like Liam James, who later became a lieutenant colonel. And at this
Manley there?
Yeah, Manley was not there, but Manley supported the festival. We had people like John Miller, who was there. Now, this is the 1978 conference, but there's an earlier conference and an earlier organization to which you alluded.
Tell me about the earlier one.
That one is spectacular.
We're going back to the first one.
I want to show you a book. You know, it's called For King and Country, The Service and Sacrifice of the British West Indian Military. And here's my father in British Army uniform in 1943. And there's another Dominican, Twistleton Bertrand, but he's in the uniform of the Canadian Army. He'd been in the British Army with my dad. But this book also has two fascinating Royal Air Force officers. One, Squadron Leader Philip Louis Ulrich Cross of Trinidad and Tobago. Later became a very distinguished jurist. Was a squadron leader, 80 missions in his Mosquito, in 139 Squadron, Bomber Command.
Back up a little bit. Back up a little bit. Tell me about the 1945 conference where all of the youth were. You're getting to that.
Yes, because Cross at that time, I mentioned Cross was, at that time, Cross had been demobilized from the Royal Air Force and was attending law school. He was at Middle Temple. Dudley Thompson had, in 45, become Jamaica's Rhodes Scholar to Oxford. After being demobilized from the Royal Air Force, where he was a flight lieutenant. He worked with Cross at the Colonial Office to demobilize colonial soldiers. Who was there at that time? Who were the students there? Forbes Burnham of Guyana was studying there. Eugenia Charles, who later became the Prime Minister of Dominica, she was studying there. Elsa Agovar, the first West Indian female PhD at the University of West Indies, she was studying there. Errol Barrow, who later became Prime Minister of Barbados, he was a pilot officer in the Royal Air Force. He also was part of that organization that met in London and took a position for two things: the independence of the British West Indies and the unity of the British West Indies under the federal government, to include Guyana. And so the relationship between Barrow, Forbes Burnham, Michael Manley of Jamaica was there. Now, those young men and women in their formative years at university in London, the citadel of the colonial power, had bonded in common cause to seek the independence of the British West Indies and the advancement of Caribbean integration. And as God would have it, and I say it, they were later instrumental in the forming of what became CARICOM.
CARICOM. Okay.
See?
Okay.
So it had its roots in London, and folks who had been in the service, primarily the Royal Air Force. This book is important because a lot of the leaders who were in the Royal Air Force, 7,000 West Indians served in the Royal Air Force during World War II. No nation or group of nations contributed more men to the Royal Air Force in World War II than the British West Indies. 7,000. Half of those came from Jamaica. The remainder, like Cy Grant from New Amsterdam, came from different parts. We had Osman Aline from Dominica, Earl Barrow from Barbados, and so forth and so on. Cy Grant is a famous Guyanese,
yes.
from then what they call BG, British Guyana, from New Amsterdam, who became one of the first black flight lieutenants. His Lancaster was shot down over Glencastaten in Holland, and he was captured by the Germans after the Dutch handed him over to avoid reprisals. And he too was a member of the West Indian Student Union. What's important for your audience to recognize is Dudley Thompson told me at 92, all law firm invited Dudley Thompson and Ulrich Cross to Washington, and that's on the cover of this magazine here. This is Dudley Thompson in the uniform of a flight lieutenant. This is my dad. This is Bertrand of Dominica. Both Bertrand and my father, of course, were Dominican. And this is Ulrich Cross of Trinidad, living Buckingham Palace, where he had been given the DSO. And what he said to me was, they not only organized themselves, but they helped their African colleagues organize the West African Student Union, WASU. So you had WISU, West Indian Student Union, and you had WASU, West African Student Union. The folks at WASU worked with Thompson and one George Padmore and Dr. W.B. Du Bois, or Dubois, to organize the 1945 Pan-African Conference in Manchester. And Thompson tells me that at that time the Royal Air Force was held in high esteem because of their successes in the Battle of Britain. He was able to get carte blanche, easy access to a conference space, and they organized the 1945 Pan-African Conference. And these were the following leaders. Kwame Nkrumah was there. Jomo Kenyatta, who later went on to lead Kenya, was there. Nnamdi Ezekwe, who later became president of Nigeria, was there. Hastings Banda, who later became president of Malawi, was there. And so you had, Kwame Nkrumah, of course, became president of Ghana. This enormous flowering of Pan-African and Pan-Caribbean solidarity and symposia, exchanging ideas and working together, due in great measure to West Indian students who were in London in 1945-46.
Okay. Now that is a very powerful connection.
Yes.
And this is something that our history does not teach us. The connections that existed and how the student leaders became the leaders of the nations, and how the concepts that drive us now
That's right.
Were actually fermented.
Indeed.
Right. It didn't just pop up accidentally.
Brother Norman, I share with you my deep-seated belief, and I have shared it with the Guyana Defense Force Legionnaires. I was at the Legion Post, and I donated some of our work. I encouraged them. I said, folk, my father died 2 years after the book came out. We started working with him at 87, 88. We almost lost him. My father died in 2011, October 7th. Dudley Thompson died January 12th, 2012, and Cross died October 11th, I believe, 2013. We caught them just in time. Had we not caught them and recorded them for posterity, we would have lost that record, that so important record. I interviewed Eugenia Charles because though she took my scholarship for being someone who was, in her view, radical, we became friends after 13 years of her being in leadership and visiting Washington. And I interviewed her and did her biography. I did Dame Mary Eugenia Charles' biography was done by me, and she mentions the organization. She didn't give us as much detail, but Cross and Dudley filled in all the gaps. And so now we have a record of the leadership of these distinguished West Indian students.
Now, take us there now from that connection and that history to the Tuskegee Airmen, because you are now the first black, the first African who is the chairman of the Tuskegee Airmen the northeast section, or is it the entire Tuskegee?
No, so the foundational chapter, I'm the first non-American
born. Okay.
The organization has been
non-American born.
Non-American born,
okay.
and non-Air Force officer.
Yeah.
The organization has been traditionally made up of American-born, African-American Air Force linked personnel.
Tell us about that.
So
that
in
connection.
1941, the Tuskegee Airmen experience started at Tuskegee, Alabama, and they went into combat in 1942. They were African-American aviators and ground crew engaged in what was a segregated United States Army Air Corps. The African-American Church, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and well-wishers like Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a progressive, the wife of President Roosevelt, advocated for them to be put into combat. And when they did, they blazed a trail of glory in the struggle for freedom, in that their record for protecting aircraft under escort was second to none. As a result of their efforts, as a result of their valiant effort, and I just want it to be known that today, October 2nd, the night when the Super Bowl is being played in the United States in Miami, the coin to open the game is being tossed by a Tuskegee Airman who is a member of our chapter, Colonel McGee, who has just been promoted to Brigadier General McGee, right here. It's Colonel McGee, you know, Program Magazine from this year, and he is doing the coin toss because the Tuskegee Airmen are going to be recognized at this Super Bowl. As a result of their successes, in 1948, July 26, President Truman, Harry S. Truman, signed Executive Order 1981, desegregating United States Armed Forces. These were all students from Howard University, University of Illinois, some from MIT, and the success of the airmen, the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces inexorably led to the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King, and the rise of African Americans in the U.S. society, in an integrated society moving towards a deepening of democracy, and of course Martin Luther King. So the veterans, as in the British West Indies, who were agents of change, similarly in the United States, the Tuskegee Airmen and the other African American servicemen were agents of social transformation. And I became a member because my father had served. I always wanted a military career. I was a cadet from age 11. Our cadets would come here to Guyana to train with the GDF. I never came, but other cadets came.
Cadets from Dominica.
And our cadet movement was very old. It started in 1910, maybe the second or third oldest cadet corps program. There was a cadet corps program, a QC. I spoke to General Singh years ago because he got a copy of my book and wrote me a very nice letter. And I spoke to him this evening also, Joe Singh, yes. And he enjoyed the book because what we did was we captured history of West Indians in service from British Guyana, BG, Jamaica, Trinidad, in a way that nobody had ever done. It's got information that's nowhere else because we were able to speak to the persons actually involved, as opposed to get it from secondary source material. We got it first party, all right, first person, and from the parties themselves, right, before they passed on. So I just wanted to say it's so important for students to be encouraged to understand here in Guyana and elsewhere that the little things they do today to better the conditions of our communities may resound later on in history by starting early that commitment to contribute to the advancement of our civilization. No effort is too small, no effort is unimportant. If we stick to being studious, organized and disciplined and dedicated to the proposition that our people are capable of great feats in economics, in political organization, in science and technology. And on that point, I just want to say that is part of the reason that I'm happy to be here as a guest of the International Decade for the Advancement of People of African Descent, so we can talk about science and technology, partnering with the Tuskegee Airmen, helping civil aviation, talking about renewable energy, and those sorts of meaningful things that can improve lives here in Guyana.
Now, okay. Now, having gone, so this is the root of your passion.
Yes.
It is not something you went to school to study. It
No.
is something that you have lived. Yes. It's very intimate and very close.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And I think this is one of the things we need to get across to the audience, is that one has to engage in the process of life. And you can't engage in the process of life through your cell phone. One has to engage in the process of life through activity.
Yes.
Now, whether it's cadet corps, going to the military, student organizations, collectively working towards a common good, but you have to engage in the process. It means you have to devote yourself and your time. And it's not a third person. I can't say, well, Gabriel, can you participate and tell me what it's about when you come out? No. It has to be a personal.
Brother Norman, what you've said is so profound. A lot of times we criticize our young people. I try not to do that. I try to embrace our young people with love and understanding and sharing of what I have in way of knowledge. We must do the following so our communities can prosper. I must be able to go to a bookstore in Georgetown and read about Chedi Jagan, good, bad, or indifferent. I must be able to go to a bookstore in Georgetown and read about Lyndon Forbes Burnham, good, bad, or indifferent. I need to be able to go to a Georgetown bookstore and get a nice coffee table book about the rise of the African Guyanese community, the arrival of the Indo-Guyanese community, the role of the Amerindian community, those who were Portuguese, how it all came together, what they did, good, bad, or indifferent. By that studious application of our time, by establishing the written record, I'm a lawyer, the history of the case. We have the British common law. Absent the history of the case, there's no case.
There's no case. Yeah.
There's no precedent. So we have to adopt the culture of not being intellectual Philistines, where we are just, whimsical and haphazard in our approach. Let's make the library our friend. Let's use the smartphone in a smart way. Let's use it to study science, technology, history, economics. And once we've done that, let's begin to do what the ancient scribes did. The folks who wrote the hieroglyphics on the walls of those tombs in Egypt long, long ago. The folks in Greece, the Greeks, who in Greece wrote on the Grecian urn. We need to create that culture and enforce it where we write down our history so that it can be there for posterity as a guide, so we can understand the mistakes we made, appreciate that which we did well, and keep on sharpening our sword.
And but the point there is that we have to get students to understand that, and the whole history of 7,000 airmen at the end of World War II, leading the way.
Yes.
Tuskegee Airmen leading the way. And it is a day-to-day effort. It is not something you can do third person.
Let me tell you how you're very right. So here is Colonel McGee, who 2 days before his birthday, he was born on December 7th, 1919. He's 100 years old. He flew twice from Maryland.
100 years old.
At 100 years old, he flew a jet twice from Gettysburg to, I think, Dover Air Force Base, and is still inspiring young people. He's still giving speeches. He's appeared on CBS News with me to promote our youth in aviation program. His daughter, Yvonne, similarly inspired, is doing the same thing by directing. She's a pilot as well. The youth in aviation program, where we train young people to fly aircraft and to get involved in ground crew, as in maintenance of aircraft and aerospace careers. The same thing we would like to have happen here in Guyana.
Get involved.
Get involved.
Get involved. You must get involved.
Get involved. Be passionate about the good things you do, and volunteer your time to serve others. Service to others is the rent that we pay for our space on Mothership Earth. You have not lived if you've not had the principled orientation of serving your community, serving your fellow man, your fellow woman, because where you can do that, it makes you a better person, makes you more gracious, and you can then live your life with the spirit of gratitude and the spirit of empathy for others. Yeah.
Okay. Now, take us then. We've gone from you, Gabriel, to person, to some of the things that are lay the foundation for your passion.